There's certain people who just leave their mark. They endear themselves to the community that they served so strongly that they're just never forgotten.
Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. He understood what the Lord taught.
He gave his heart, his time, even his life to nurturing the children.
The name of Olivas Aoy doesn't appear in history textbooks. If any photos of him have survived the past 120 years, they lie lost and unlabeled in an archive. This man, who spent his life serving the forgotten and the marginalized, remains unknown by all but a few, who will be forever grateful for his work.
His life was that of a wanderer, so he was always searching.
Born in Spain, Aoy originally trained to be a Franciscan priest. And though he left the Catholic Church as a young man, he took to heart the teachings of St. Francis about the poor. From Spain, Aoy went to Cuba and saw the plight of Mayan captives brought in from Mexico for rebellion and used as forced laborers. Aoy soon moved to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, lived among the Mayans in their time of trouble, and saw firsthand the injustices America's native peoples faced.
He seems to be looking for places where there are problems, not easy places, but difficult places.
During the U.S. Civil War, Aoy sailed north to New Orleans and taught freed slaves and black regiments how to read and write. After the war, he moved out to the still wild American West, publishing a small newspaper to call for progress, equality, and development.
His editorials promote progressive ideals, and he becomes, in a sense, a preacher of a sort, a secular preacher.
During this period, he becomes acquainted with Mormons.
Lawrence Peterson, a Spanish-speaking Mormon who was preaching the gospel in New Mexico, gave Aoy church literature, including copies of La Voz del Desierto, the first Mormon newspaper published in Mexico.
Aoy is taken by the message, and especially since he had been in the Yucatan, had an interest in those people, had an interest in the downtrodden, those who had been dispossessed, and this idea of ennobling them. A message that kind of thematically runs through the Book of Mormon.
He obviously came to the Latter-day Saints later in his life, midlife really, I would say, and it must have had a long-term impact on him.
In a letter Lawrence Peterson forwarded to church president John Taylor, Aoy expressed his commitment to the faith and his desire to serve.
I not only wish to be useful to the church, but also to put my labor into the most profitable channels of vigorous action. Do not forget in your prayers your most obedient and humble servant in Jesus Christ, the Christ of progress. Olivas Aoy.
And so he elected to become a member of the church, was baptized, then decided to go to Salt Lake. He shows up and meets some other individuals who are busily engaged in the translation process of the Book of Mormon into Spanish.
Aoy helped translators Meliton Trejo and James Stewart complete the translation and prepare it for publication.
He added some significant points to the translation itself, including simple words like, for the plates, the planchas, instead of placas. And all subsequent Spanish speakers in the church today know the gold plates as the planchas de oro. And that word selection came from Aoy.
And he had printer's experience, editorial skills. He had the very set of talents and qualities that would be useful in such an endeavor.
It's so unique when you look at this team, this group of people that were brought together for the translation, that you can see the Lord's hand and who was there.
The Book of Mormon translation would have a significant impact on the church, but it also changed the course of Aoy's own life.
Aoy had had this contact with the Mayans in the Yucatan years before he ever showed up in Salt Lake City. And when he started translating the Book of Mormon in Spanish, there are all kinds of parallels that he drew from the Book of Mormon that he related to the Mayans that he had lived among. many years earlier.
You start with the title page. I mean, it was for the Lamanites and the rest of the house of Israel. So I can see why he evidently understood the Book of Mormon, understood the promises, and he wanted to be instrumental in helping the children of Lehi.
Aoy drafted a plan to return to the Yucatan and sent it to President John Taylor.
The way in which you can ennoble and raise people and change their circumstances is by educating them. And so he wanted to go down and set up schools among the Mayas.
Aoy did receive the blessing of President Taylor to go and commence this endeavor. And I think that that's important because it gave Aoy a sense of confidence and direction and purpose that he was on the Lord's errand.
And so that's why he headed out to Mexico, but he never quite got there.
While on that journey, he stopped at El Paso to wait for his luggage to catch up. And while there, he saw a need, and that became the culmination of his existence, the culmination of his life.
In El Paso, Aoy met Spanish-speaking parents and learned how difficult it was for their children to get education.
El Paso is a city right on the border, and you'll always have people coming in from Mexico. It's been this way from the beginning.
The only time that the Anglos form a majority of the El Paso population is very briefly during the 1890s. But the attitude at this time is that this is an Anglo city, we build Anglo institutions. So when they designed the school board, it was primarily for the Anglo students or those who spoke English.
Aoy recognizes that the Anglo population, sure, their kids can be mainstreamed and they can get an education and so forth, but what about all these other children whose only language is Spanish? They're not going to have an opportunity to get an education because there is no Spanish education in the city at all.
Olivas Aoy was faced with a decision. Should he move on toward the Yucatan, or should he stay and help the children of El Paso?
This need was obvious to him, and his skill set was perfect. He was bilingual, well-educated, and so he takes on this mission personally, giving these children a chance by instructing them in English.
Many times we're going to go a certain way or do a certain thing, and then we end up doing something else. And we say, well, I guess I just changed my mind, but I think Heavenly Father wanted him to be here. He felt the need, he saw the need, he was probably prompted to stay and to help. And he didn't know what obstacles he was going to have to face, but he moved forward with faith.
It's like he's on an eternal quest to find the place where he's needed, where he fits, where his skills can do the most good. And it took him all the way to El Paso to finally be able to say, aha, this is it.
And so he had been paid for the services that he had rendered in proofreading, editing, and assisting in the translation of the Book of Mormon into Spanish. And he used the money to get his school up and running. For him, it was God's work.
Aoy chose to adapt his plan for schools among the Mayans for use in Hispanic El Paso. He rented a room, bought supplies, and opened a school designed to prepare Spanish-speaking students to enter and succeed in the public schools.
Professor Aoy found, as he informed a Times reporter, that many Mexican children enter the public school knowing little or nothing of English. Many stay away from school altogether because of the difficulty. Those who do go must struggle along for months, neither understanding their teachers nor understood by them.
He was prepared, he was educated, and he had a willing heart. And so he just rolled up his sleeves and started serving and working and loving the children of God.
Professor Aoy saw that there was a chance for him to help along the work of welding the two classes of our population. He found a touching eagerness among the poor Mexicans for a school, but no money to provide for it. He saw that he must expect no remuneration other than the gratitude of parents and children and the satisfaction of helping in a good work.
He would spend whatever he could on children to educate them. Just to give you an idea, he didn't have a pillow, he didn't have a bed, he slept on a bench.
I worked with migrant children in a one-room school. They were kindergarten to the 6th grade. And it was hard. Going through that, I can understand how Mr. Aoy struggled. Everything he had, he wanted to do for his children. Because if children are hungry, they're not going to learn. So these were some of the challenges that he had. And he had to solve them by himself because he didn't have anyone to help him.
As his funds became limited, Aoy must have worried about the future of his school.
So he essentially was putting everything into the school to the point of being malnourished.
One night, Olivas Aoy fell from a ladder while cleaning and broke his leg. Those who helped him discovered that he was living in the schoolroom and saw his poverty. They soon joined calls to have his school integrated into the public school system.
What he did was tweak the consciences of the school board. They came to acknowledge that they had been neglecting a large portion of the El Paso population. By the early 1890s, the school board had recognized his importance and had put him on a salary. He got a salary of $35 a month.
He takes the bulk of the meager salary that the El Paso School Board was paying him to run his school and uses it on the school. He lives, supposedly, on $7 a month. I call him a saint because he was dedicated to doing good for others. He was not in it for himself, he was in it for humanity.
Aoy's model was such a success that the school board soon hired other teachers to work under his supervision and started construction on a school, which would one day carry his name.
The school board built several of these schools in what they called the Mexican part of town.
There's an Aoy Elementary School and an Aoy Street. To this day, his contribution is not forgotten by the city of El Paso.
If Mr. Aoy saw this school the way it is now, he would be very happy with what they've done.
He clearly had a very big impact on El Paso, and ultimately he had an impact on the entire American Southwest. Aoy died in 1895 and was sorely missed by not just the Mexican part of the town, but also the Anglo leaders.
The funeral started at his home, and they went all the way to where the burial site was at the Evergreen Cemetery, and that's several miles away. Ex-students, families, and all those people that he helped, showing respect and love for this man.
Until the end of his life, Aoy had hoped to one day finish his work in El Paso and fulfill his mission to the Mayans. But to those he served, it was clear he had done the Lord's work. On his tombstone, they engraved a scripture from the Gospel of Matthew.
Y respondiendo el rey les dirá, de cierto os digo, que cuando lo hicisteis a uno de estos mis hermanos pequeñitos, a mí me lo hiciste.
The least of these were the invisible, the ones who don't have a chance unless somebody actually sacrifices to help. And that's what he did, and I think that was a perfect description of his life.
I can only say thank you, Aoy.
I think what we can learn from Aoy's example is that we need to forget who we are, forget the color of our skin, forget how much we know. You give up your time, your talents, everything that the Lord has blessed you with to share with these children. And you hope that someday they will know that the Lord loves them. If we do everything we can for these children, we have done it unto the Lord.